Hello all, welcome to another lesson of the Rook versus Pawns endgames. This lesson I will continue covering the pawn chain we saw on last one where I played against the engine. This is really the perfect structure for the defensive side for black, and there are some positions where this structure allows black to draw, and white also needs to pay attention because if it plays sloppy, it can easily lose. In fact, if the pawns were a bit more advanced, it would be enough for black can claim a win over here. So let's go slowly because there are many key positions, many key concepts to absorb on this important and pedagogic um, position of these end games. Uh, One thing to remember is having this structure with one pawn per row connected is the best defensive structure black can use. If the pawns advance without care, it will be easier for white to attack them. Keep that in mind. Also, on the back, the king wants to protect the weakest pawn the more he can. Uh, of course, always with the threat of advancing the most advanced pawn, in this situation, the f file pawn. And because of the f file pawn, white always need to keep attention to it. So, for example, either using the rook to control the advance of the pawn or using the king so the pawn if advances is lost. So here we have the starting position. It's white to move. If it was black to move, it would be easier for white to win. And basically, all the point of the white strategy on the main line is to reach this position or a similar position where black is forced to abandon the defense of the weakest pawn. Of course, we need to take this pawn controlling always the possibility of the f pawn advancing. Always keep that in mind, don't forget it. If you try to rush things too much when you notice, you are not going to be able to stop that pawn, either because it advances or the other pawn. For example, if in a situation where the king takes the pawn, of course, let's say, for example, the king goes here and my king takes the pawn, then I advance and the rook can come in time, and then two pawns against the rook will be a win for black. Always pay attention to the most advanced pawn. So white to play. Of course, black does not want to allow losing the pawn, especially because now white is controlling the advance of the f pawn. So this is again a simple move. Almost both moves were forced. And here, as you notice again, if black abandons the position, either loses the pawn if it goes, for example, over here or here, loses the pawn, or if it goes back, then I get same position with black to move. So again, this is a key position where the side that needs to abandon this opposition is going to benefit from it. So basically, all the moves we are going to do is to get these same positions where black needs to give it away. Uh, Here, now I give a check, and we have our basically new position where black needs to choose one side to go. Of course, the best is to go to f5, but let's see that later. First, let's look at what happens if it comes back. Notice that now I can approach my king, and I have almost, I can say this, won the opposition again. And this pawn can't advance because it will be taken, and the other pawn also can't advance because the rook is has an easy access to the f file, so it will be easy for the rook to control and taking the pawn. So here, black can try to delay what is happening by, for example, going to the side. But our target, don't forget, is this pawn now. But we need to take it with tempo. So this move directly forces black to give away the pawn, because if it comes back Then I can take the pawn with check, and then cleaning all the pawns under the way. Next, I will go here and grab the other pawn. So basically, black can try to attack the rook, but it will be similar. I'll go here. Now black comes to the same position, but it's white to move. I don't want to take the pawn now, because otherwise I can advance the e pawn, forcing my king to select between leaving the rook to be grabbed or catching the pawn. Won't be pretty, okay? Because then we have the two pawns on the sixth rank against the rook, basically. So when we come here, we need to remember that in these positions, both the intermediate check and the tempo lost, so kind of passing the move for the other side, are the best strategies. And here, uh, passing the move to the other side with this simple move, where we keep controlling the advance of the pawn, but now it's black to move again, basically coming back, and then we get a similar position as before, and now this pawn will be controlled this way. Okay, so this is the position where black decides to go to the other side. Of course, here black has two options, but basically this option will end up to be a faster way for white. I will come back later, but for the moment, let's see the best move. Okay, now white plays the king f2. We want to create a situation where we can win a tempo, forcing black to play and abandon the opposition. Let's say, for example, here, black needs to control the advancing of the pawns. Let's say, for example, here, if black goes like, for example, d4, this allows us to grab immediately the pawn. Let's see how. We first give a check. The king needs to come back. And now we place black in zugzang, because now black needs to choose in abandoning this pawn, like for example, coming here and then we take the pawn. It's not an option. Let me just show you, because now this pawn is pinned, so it can't advance anymore. And in the next move, I can bring my king or take the pawn directly. It will be easy. So Zugzang forces black basically to advance this pawn. And this is another interesting position that shows up many times. And it's the proof that when we get defensively away from the ideal position, we get into trouble. So anytime a pawn moves from black, white normally is happy. We go here. So of course now black needs to decide what to do, because other offers 1 pound to get initiative again, but it won't matter. It will be easy. Let's say, for example, if it goes here, remember the intermediate checks. We want to take this pawn with check. So we go here, just winning a tempo. Of course, if black goes here, then we simply get this position. If it goes down, or if it, for example, let's say sacrifices the pawn, I can take with tempo, and if it goes up, I can simply control the promotion. This is a situation that we are happy to see in the game. So this was just to show you what happens if black plays prematurely the advance of the pawn. So what black wants to do is to keep the opposition. Here there are two ways, one with the short opposition and the other with the longer opposition, having three squares between the kings. The best one is to go to the longer opposition, but again, we need to go with a slower pace. Let's see what happens if black comes with a king to the direct opposition, king f4. Again, we want to be in a situation where we force black to play. So in this situation, what happens is black is divided between two squares. So I need to find a way to pass the move for black. And the trick, and notice and try to remember these kind of tricks, is to use the rook, because the rook has three squares to function. And so let's go here, because what we're trying to say to black is come and attack us, like for example coming here, and we go just one square away, forcing the king to decide where it wants to go, either coming back, like for example here, and then I get the same position with black to move. Remember, I just want to pass the move for black in the same position, and if it goes up, I simply can go again up, and it's black to move again, like coming down, and I have basically won the control of the square that I want. Of course, let me just note here one thing, that when I come here, if black plays this, we saw this just now, so it moves away from the perfect structure, but be careful, because white needs to know the proper technique to force black to abandon this defensive position. And the move is giving a check. I give a check. So the king now needs to abandon the position he was. And when it goes up, then I simply bring my rook, and basically black is starting to stay in a zugzwang position, because if it advances the pawn, I can control them. Let's see that later. And if it goes to one side, I simply can again place black in zugzwang, because now if it advances the pawn, I take the other. If it goes to the other side, then I take the pawn, and again the pawn will be pinned. I will take the other, and it just not lose control, and I will grab all the pawns. So when I go here and black advances again, then I simply occupy this position, and notice that this position is winning for white. Let's see, for example, just one example. Imagine, for example, if the king goes here, remember I want to take this pawn with tempo. I don't want to take the pawn without checking the king. So the right move is to go here, forcing the king to abandon the protection of the pawn. And if it comes back, I will take with check, and then I can control the other pawns, of course. So let's say if it goes here, it's check. Then, for example, going here, of course, I can take the pawn if I'm not doing nothing wrong here. For example, trying to attract the king to the most advanced pawn. We saw this, but in the opposite, in the mirror position. So we just give a check. Well, let's imagine it goes here, and then next move I will take the pawn. This was to explain what happened when, after this move, black advances the pawn. So either way, I'm going to attract the king and force the exchange of the move. So this is the correct way to continue if the king goes to the short opposition. But the best move is to go to the longer opposition, to the larger opposition, forcing white to think a bit more. If I go here, because what I want is to try to force the pawn to advance, or to earn a position where I can force progression, uh, black comes back and there's no progression. If I go to the other side, it's the same way. Black goes there and there's no progression again. So here I need to triangulate, and that's why I came back to f2, because here I have more space to triangulate. And the correct move, if you want to try to think for yourself, this is the hardest part of the strategy to win against this particular structure. When I have a rook on the 8th rank, and the right move is to go g1. So kind of triangulate to get a decent opposition, but in my favor. So here, black is forced to come back, and instead of going back and getting the same position, I will complete my triangulation. Notice that now if black goes to the f4 square, I can simply win the opposition, so I reach the position that I want. And if it goes back, I can again win the decent opposition. So let's see, for example, if it goes here, I win the opposition. Either way, it will be the same. So when the king goes back, I get this intending position. So all these maneuvers were done just to reach this position and forcing black to move away. So black to move, it has not many options. Advancing the pawn, we already know the technique. We give we bring our king, and when the king comes to the opposition, we give a check. Then we force this kind of positions, taking one pawn or force it to advance. Then we get this position. We saw this before. So let's come back a bit. This was to show that advancing the pawn is not also possible. So the best move for black is to try to keep as much as it can the control of entering with my king. Of course, we need to remember now that it's white to play, and we must not forget the square rule. So we don't want to make a mistake of going, for example, over here and allowing the pawn to promote to a queen, and then we are losing the game. Uh, but at the same time, we want to get this position, but forcing black to move even farther. But of course, now it's not possible because the rook is here. So we need also to use a trick over here. We go to h2. If you want to remember, we go to a square of the same color of the opposite king. Let's come back a bit. Okay, over here we go to the color of the same color of the opposite king, and when the king comes back I'll do the same, and when it goes to a black square I do the same, and until he leaves the position that I want to earn. And here it's basically the same. The only way to force it's again a triangulation. Let's see it happen, but with an intermediate move that makes the key to win this end game. Of course, black comes back, so if I go back, it's the same situation, and we are going to be here up and down, and no progression made. But now I have this simple trick, and this position is important because I don't want to allow black to go over here. Of course, I don't. So I have this move also to attract black to either one of these defensive squares. And the best move for black is of course go over here, because if it goes over here, I simply grab the opposition, diagonal opposition in this situation, and it will be a win. But black makes my life a bit harder. It protects the pawn, but I simply have the final triangulation, and of course now black needs to keep protecting the pawn, and finally I will go I'm going to be able to force the position. Let's see just one move here. Of course, advancing the pawn is not enough because I go to f2, and soon we'll see that I will win the position, so no need to see what happens when the pawn advances. Nevertheless, we need to study also those positions where black moves away from the fixed structure. Here, basically, let's see black going up, and of course, remember, I can't go over here because otherwise the pawn advances. But as black needs to be locked here to the defensive of the weakest pawn, I can go and simply win the opposition. Remember from the beginning that we played here, black played here, and we wish black was to play. Well, now it's black to play. So all this blah 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 and these explanations, triangulations, hard moves, and so on, very hard. But after we learn about them, I think it's going to be easier for you to remember. Was to reach this position, forcing black to move away. Of course, moving away, I will reach again an important position, because notice the following: the pawn can't advance because I am still able to go to the f file. Uh, and now I am threatening this pawn. Of course, I will try to grab this pawn with check. Don't forget that. I need tempos. Here, for example, if I take the pawn directly, I will be facing this advance and I will not be able to give here the control of the f file because the king is simply controlling the entrance of the rook. So first, from our previous lessons, and I talked about it already in this one, we give an intermediate check first. And now, yes, the king is forced to move away, either from the square where if I can take, it will be with check, or controlling the square where my rook can control the advance of the most advanced pawn. And now if I come here, well, this is going to be easier. I can take the pawn, or for example, if the pawn advances, I simply can control it from behind because now my king is controlling. Okay, so let's come back here on this position. And here we saw that if black goes back, I will reach the intending position. But let's see what happens if black goes in the front of the pawn, because there was also this possibility. Well, then I move here. Of course, black doesn't want to easy things for me going to c5, because otherwise I will be just getting the opposition without much effort. So here black goes to c4, but now the king can come in, as the advancing of this pawn is controlled by the rook and my king, and it will be taken with check, so not possible for black. Black goes to the opposition, and okay, this is winning, but we still need to concretize it to a win. And my advice is to use this simple technique of going to the middle pawn, attacking the middle pawn, because now if black comes back, I can simply with this tempo give a check, king moves away, and now I am controlling all the pawns. Notice that now I still am able to go control either if this pawn advances. If the other advance, I can take it, and soon I will take this one. Not in a rush. What I do is use my rook always from the up 8th rank. Here it's easier because it's a check, and then I take it, and I have time to control over here. But normally, attacking from above is the best, because that will guarantee that I will always be able to reach the f file. Okay, anyway, let's see if it goes over here. Then it's the same situation. I am still controlling the most advanced pawn. So when the king moves away, again, don't forget this move, because we always want to take this with tempo. So if the king comes back, it's going to be check, and then we are going to take the pawns as we saw before. If the pawn advances, well, it's already game over. I will control every pawn and win the game. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed these positions. Just one final note to remember, that when I came here and rook gives a check, remember that we had also this option. Well, this option just speed up the thing, because when the king goes here and the king goes here, then we get this for free without needing our downstairs triangulation, if you remember. Okay? Okay, see you again in future lessons. Bye bye.